So my name is Ben Ramsey. Tonight we'll talk about cool tools for PHP development, but first I'll give a little bit of an introduction for myself, and I will, tell you what I'm doing for the summer and all that too. As has been mentioned, I am, a maintainer for the Ramsey UUID library, and that has my last name in it, if you're wondering. I'm also a PHP 8.1 release manager. If that's something that you're interested in hearing more about, I'm happy to talk about that at the end of the presentation. Next week, Alpha 8.1 Alpha 2 comes out. I'm also a co-organizer for the Nashville PHP user group, and I'm a staff engineer at Skillshare. And so for this summer, we don't have any big plans yet. We're still kind of taking it easy, kind of trying to see how things are going with the rest of the world and the rest of the country as it opens up. But this fall, we're planning on going back to a little town in East Tennessee. We have renting a cabin there. It's called Gatlinburg. I don't know if you're familiar with it, over on the West Coast or West Central, whatever it's called. You're not on the coast, but you know what I mean. You're in the West from me. But they have mountains there, and they're tiny mountains, not like Utah mountains, but they're still lovely. But yeah, we're gonna go hang out there in October. It's something we do every year, and have a lot of fun out there. Let's see. At Skillshare, I'll tell you a little bit about Skillshare. My employer, we are also hiring. I put this slide in my slide decks because my employer, lets me. I know this is not during work hours, but if I speak at a conference and stuff like that, they let me do these kinds of things. But Skillshare is a learning platform. We allow anyone to create a class, and then there's like a revenue sharing model. So depending on the number of times people watch your class, you can make some money. We have top teachers who are able to do that as their full-time job, down to people with smaller classes that make just a little bit, but it's a kind of nice extra little cash to have on the side. We are hiring all sorts of developers right now. If you go to our careers page, there are a few jobs posted, but there are others that have not been posted yet. So we're trying to fill a pipeline for the rest of the year. And, if something doesn't look right for what you are looking for, but you are interested in the company, just reach out, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have as well tonight or online. I'm on Twitter, and you can also feel free to email me. I'll have my email address at the end. So that is Skillshare. So tonight we're talking about cool tools for PHP, but more specifically, I want to talk about DX, and that is developer experience. When we think about developer experience, a lot of times to me, actually, it is kind of a new term. It's a term that I've only really been seeing the last couple of years. And it's really through my interactions with other communities like the JavaScript community that I've seen this term. It's a term that the JavaScript community in particular, I think about as using it a lot to talk about tools that they use, their workflows, and how they build their software. Another community where this term plays an important role is also in like the Laravel community. A lot of times you'll see the Laravel developers and people within that community talking about developer experience and about the tools they use and how they need to construct better developer experiences. You'll also hear DevRel, developer relations people, talk about DX a lot. And they're talking about it from the standpoint of their company. Their company might have tools that they want software developers to use. And it's important to them that those tools have a good developer experience. So let's talk about what DX is. This quotation comes from a paper that was published in 2012. And back then, this is like right on the cusp of everyone starting to talk about DX. in those terms, they were calling it DEX. So they said DEX consists of experiences relating to all kinds of artifacts and activities that a developer may encounter as part of their involvement in software development. And they divide it into roughly 3 experiences: development infrastructure, affectation, so like how developers feel about their work, and then conation, how developers feel about the value, how they see the value of their contribution to the software they're making. And so when we're talking about DX tonight, and most of the time when we talk about DX, we're really focusing on the tools. And that's the infrastructure side of things. I think that the other 2 are equally important to talk about. They are more from a psychological standpoint that I'm not really qualified to kind of get into, but I really enjoy kind of thinking about like those parts of the developer experience as well. And when you're building a community, an open source community, or like a user group or whatever, you do have to kind of think about these things as well, because you want to make sure that developers who are contributing feel respected, that they feel a sense of belonging on the team, that they've got motivation to contribute, that their goals align with your goals. So these things are all very important, whether they're on a team at work or a team in the open source community. But tonight, we're going to focus on the infrastructure side. How can you create better tooling around your development infrastructure to create a better developer experience? So I've kind of already gone over these, but the question we're going to look at right now or tonight is, how do developers perceive the development infrastructure? So how do you perceive the infrastructure? Do your tools get in the way? Are they a joy to use? Do they spark joy? The better experience a developer has with their tools, the more efficient and happy they'll be. This is at least kind of the going principle, or the thinking around this right now. And there are studies that show that yes, when there's a better developer experience, and when the tools are easier to use, developers are more efficient and happier. So you want to make your team happier. You want to be happier yourself. How can we do that with the tools we use? So I want to talk about cool tools, mainly because that's some cool little rhyme. But what are they? They are the tools you need to do your job. They are the tools that make your job easier. And they're the tools that bring joy to your work. That sounds really weird, talking about bringing joy to your work. But really, if you're not joyful in what you do, if it brings you zero joy, then you're probably going to have a hard time doing it. And a lot of times tools can get in the way of having a joyful experience while doing your job. So when even like little tiny things can make your job better and easier, maybe not necessarily easier in this example I'm about to give, but can at least bring maybe a little bit more joy. The example I like to think about is, which is kind of silly, but it's like the use of emoji in your command line tools. It's like when it's spitting out like a log message or something, and it's got like a little happy face or sad face or like a stop sign or whatever, or a chili pepper, or, whatever you want to put in your output. Sometimes those things, as silly as they might be, might even bring just a little bit extra joy. And colors also in your output, your CLI output. That actually brings me more joy than emojis. But anyway, that's what I mean about joy. Like, it could be something simple. It could be something much more complex, like just the interface that you're dealing with being very fluent or fluid, and just intuitive to use. Let me see what So our focus tonight, how can you create better workflows for the tools that you already use? And we want to think about this in terms that programming is a team sport. How can you share these workflows with your team? In other words, how can you improve your DX? So right now I'm going to jump into a live coding demo, and you know, everyone, all speakers get scared when they do live demos. So I'm like shaking here. No, not really. I've done this several times. I think it'll go smooth, but there's always a hiccup of some sort. So bear with me as we do live coding. And Chris, I swear that the eyes on that painting behind you are following me.
Oh, they are. Yep. You watch closely.
Vigo. All right. Sorry. I love it. I saw it earlier and meant to say something about it. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Let's see. I've got a terminal window I want to pull up here. All right. Let me know if that is too small. Is that in a...
Looks good.
All right. If anyone needs me to bump up the font size, just let me know. I'm actually not in the right folder, so let me get in the right folder. All right, so I've already set up a repository here to get started. It has some files already in there, things that are kind of already set up just to kind of get started. But I wanted to start off with just a very simple repository where I could take you through kind of like, let's just look at a few of the tools that I automatically put onto every project pretty much, either at work or on my own personal projects. Excuse me. And I wanted to take a look at these. Let's just take a look at what's in this repository right now so you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. That yellow might not show up very well, so I apologize for that. But this is just a standard kind of repository. You can ignore like the build directory. You can ignore these JSON and XML and Neon configuration files for right now. We'll talk a little bit more about those later. There's nothing in here that's using them right now. I went ahead and put them in here so that when I start using things, we don't have to bother setting those up right away. And then there's two files. There's like an example PHP script class and an example test for that class. If we look at the example class, super simple. This isn't really important to the talk, but you just get an idea of what's going on in here. There's just a greet function. And whatever string you pass to it, it says hello that string. And by default, there's world. So simple little hello world. Okay, and the test. I'll show you the test too. So the test is also simple. It's going to call that method, pass the word friends, and assert that it gets back the phrase hello friends. So very simple, nothing big going on here. So the tools that I often start off with when I'm working with any kind of project are PHPUnit, PHP Code Sniffer, Psalm, and PHPStan. Now I use both of these, even though they kind of do a lot of the same things, because I find that one of them catches things that the other does not, and the other focuses on things that the other doesn't do. So I like to use both of them. And you may have different preferences for your coding standards tools too. So I use PHP Code Sniffer. Some people like to use PHP CS Fixer. It's not related to Code Sniffer. But it's up to you. And we're not really kind of getting into like which tools you should use in this talk. It's more about the workflow. So let's talk about the workflow here. So I will composer require each of these tools and then walk through kind of a standard workflow using them. All right. So the first thing that I often do is, and when I'm running tools or running things that I need to do locally, I'll run the test, right? So I have to know though that when I've installed PHPUnit, it's in this vendor bin directory, right? Because that's where Composer puts the binary files or the executable files. There's another thing that I would point out, or I will point out here about PHPUnit and several other similar tools, is that the makers of PHPUnit and things like, let's see, what other tools do they have? I think PHP mess detector and those, there's a whole suite of like quality assurance tools that Sebastian Bergman and Arne Blankertz and others maintain. And their opinion and their advice is never to install your tools with Composer like this. Not these tools like PHPUnit and mess detector and even code sniffer, for example, because there can be collisions with the with your dependencies. So your project might have dependencies that could collide potentially with like PHPUnit. So they recommend installing them either just the FAR file directly or using a project called far.io, phr.io. And using that, you can set up what's called a 5.xml file. It's PHIVE. If you go to far.io, the directions will be there. And they'll install into like a tools folder. And so they're the standalone FAR files. So they won't have any collision with your project's dependencies. So that's what kind of the way they go for. I should probably put a slide for that because I like to mention that because other people have seen that and they want to understand why I'm doing things one way. And, far.io says to do things a different way. I don't think their way is, wrong. In fact, I think that there are a lot of really good points behind the way they do things. But for my example here, I'm going to do things this way just to kind of show how we can build a workflow together and use our tools a little better. So running PHPUnit from vendor bin, we just have one test, so it passes. Another thing that I like to do is run, PHP code sniffer, right? So there's two files, so they both pass. I want to run Psalm. So it inferred types for 100% of the code base, which is one file with one method. And then we'll run PHPStan, right? Similar thing here. It actually, I have PHPStan set up to look at files also in the test folder. So it sees 2 of 2 there. That's why it sees that. All right. So I've got these 4 things that I run, but I run them a lot. And I also work with a team that needs to run them. And we want to make it easier for ourselves to run them. So we want to set up kind of a workflow, a tool chain. Well, Composer allows us to do this using Composer scripts. So if you're not familiar with Composer scripts and you are familiar with Node package scripts, these are pretty much the same thing. Composer has a scripts property that we can update. Do I already have it in here? No, I don't. Composer has a scripts property that we can update and give it, whoops, not an array, an object of name value pairs. The name is the script we want to run, or it's the name we give to run. And then the value is the script we want to run. Or we can have a value that is an array. And each item in the array is a string that is either the command line command to run, or it can also be a static method on a PHP class that is at least in Composer's context, like in the autoloader. So Composer can find it. It'll run that when you call the script. We're going to do this with just these 4 tests. We'll call it test. And you saw me using vendor bin to prefix everything with. You've probably done that before too. When you're in the context of composer.json though, it knows where its vendor bin directory is. So you don't actually have to prefix anything that's there with it. So we're going to say PHPUnit. I like to run my my coding standard stuff first though. Not that it really makes a big difference, but it's just kind of the way I like to do it. So I'll put that there first, and then I'll run my static analysis tools, PHPStan and Psalm. And now when all three of those pass, we'll run the unit tests. So now I can tell my team to run composer test when they're in the project, and it will run all of those things. And every time we run it, it runs them in the same order. It runs all the tools that we expect. If I make a change to that composer.json file, push it up to the repository, whenever my team pulls it down and then they run composer test, it now has the new tools that they're running within that command. So this is a great way for us to be able to share these, this common suite of tools that I want the developers to always run when they call it. It's also very helpful in an open source project too, because in the README file, I can say, hey, run composer test or run composer foo or whatever the name of the command I want to give it is. And when they run it, it will run all the things that I want them to run. I don't have to give them a bunch of things to run, just one thing. So right there, it already streamlines our workflow. Another thing to point out about this is that this is a shortcut for composer run script test. And this can be important in the event that there's already a composer command with the same name. That's where this comes into play. So if there's a composer command with the same name, this helps avoid like a conflict. But composer test is not a standard name in composer JSON. It's not part of their schema. So we can use it and give it whatever scripts we want to run. All right, the next thing I want to talk about, though, we can take that a step further. So let's just say, for example, and this is what I've encountered at my company. Let's say that you've got a bunch of projects. And a lot of this stuff is the same stuff that you would run on every single project. You probably run them almost identical, except for maybe a few little tweaks you want to make here and there. In that case, but we don't want to set it up for every project. So we have to add this to our composer JSON in every project. Well, there's a way we are able to share this across all of our projects without having to copy and paste it into the composer JSON for each project. And in that case, like if you copy and paste it into 10 projects, but then you add another tool to the workflow, to the tool chain, now you got to go add it to all those 10 projects. You got to update each project. And with this other approach, we don't have to do that. We have one place we make the change, and then all of our projects can benefit from that change because all of our projects are sharing that change. And that is that happens when we make a composer plugin. And I'm sorry, my dog is dancing around in the background. So if you hear like tapping on the floor, that's her. And it's kind of, distracting me a little bit. So the next thing I want to talk about is composer plugins. And what better way to talk about a plugin than to talk about one that I made, obviously, because I want to promote myself. So this plugin is called Ramsey/composer-REPL, REPL. I'll install it, and it's not a REPL I created. And for those not familiar with the term REPL, REPL stands for read eval print loop. It is a CLI tool that is basically a language shell for whatever programming language you have the REPL for. In this case, it's for PHP. And it reads in your input, evaluates it, prints out the output, and then loops around to listen for more input. So that's why it's read eval print loop. It is, if you've used like, the Python interactive interpreter, or if you've used IRB for Ruby, or what Java has one that's like JShell. There's all sorts of these. And if you use like the JavaScript console, even that's a REPL in itself. So all of these libraries have like a popular REPL for them. PHP does too. PHP has PHP-A, but PHP-A is not really a full-featured REPL. It is built into the interpreter itself, but it's quite limited. And it doesn't have colors, and I like colors. So this REPL uses a REPL called SciShell. So let me show it to you real quick. And when I installed this plugin, it now has another command called composer REPL that we can then execute, and it launches a REPL. The REPL is called SciShell, and it is made by Justin Heilemann. If you go to, I think it is, let me just double check. I think I have the link at the end of my slides, but I think it's SciShell, PSYSH.org. I don't have my browser window here. Where's my browser window go? Here it is. Yes, PSYSH.org. It'll tell you all about it. But I'll show it to you real quick. I was able to, actually, SciShell is built on top of Symfony Console. If you're familiar with Symfony Console, Composer plugins are built on top of Symfony Console. And we'll take a look at that in a minute. And therefore, you're able to create a command that's like a Symfony Console command and plug that directly into SciShell. You can also plug commands into Composer through a Composer plugin using the same kind of command structure. So if I type help here, you'll see that I've added some new commands to SciShell that did not exist. These three at the bottom did not exist in, or do not normally exist in SciShell. And I've created aliases for them for like this one too. So the alias for this, if we say help PHPUnit : test, for example, it has an alias of T. So I can do something like T and then assert same. And this is the same API that you would use when using PHPUnit. So we'll just do this. So you'll see the test passed. And then if we do something wrong, it shows us our test failure. So the important thing here, though, is that we have installed this REPL. The REPL itself is configurable for your own uses. And now we'll take a look at the code behind the REPL so you can see what it takes to build a Composer plugin. So I need to stop sharing there. And this is where you see a dependabot alert or message. So just pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Only the owner of this repository can see this message. The vulnerability it's talking about is because I haven't updated composer.json to a version of Composer after the recent security vulnerability it had. Most likely, if you were to pull this down, you would not get that version of Composer because it would pull the latest version. But just in case, I need to update it so that you cannot get that version. All right. So this is Composer REPL. This is the plugin that's built around it. As you see, like in my composer.json here, it's just including SciShell. So all the magic is in SciShell. It is not my work. The only thing I did here was connect it up so that you could use it as a Composer plugin. By the way, this is the same. If you use Laravel, this is the same thing that Laravel Tinker is built on. SciShell is. All right. So what we want to look at are the things in this Composer directory. We'll look at the command first, and then the plugin code. If we look at the command, again, this is going to look a lot like a Symfony command. It extends the Composer command, base command, which also extends Symfony console command, or the abstract command, or whatever the class is called. We don't really need to look at the constructor. That's not the important part. This configure is the important part, though. We tell it the name that Composer will use, and I've given it an alias, and then we have a description. And so when we call composer REPL, this is what's telling it that like this is the name of that command that we're calling. And then execute. This is the only other thing that is part of the magic. We have an execute command or method here, and it instantiates the REPL. This is the SciShell code, and then runs it. That's all it does. All right. So when you're building a command for a Composer plugin, all you really have to do is create, configure, and execute for that command, and then make it do what you want it to do. And then this configure exposes it to Composer for your team to use. That's not all exactly. We have to have a plugin class. It doesn't have to be named plugin, but it at least has to implement several interfaces that Composer is expecting to find. This one implements the capable interface, the command provider, and the plugin interface. We'll skip over the constructor again. The capable interface says we need to give this method called getCapabilities, which returns an array of all the things that this plugin is capable of. It's only capable of one thing. It's capable of providing a command. The command provider also the command provider says we need to implement get commands, which returns an array of the commands that we implement. We only implement one. It's the REPL command that we just looked at. So we return that here. And then the plugin interface says we need to implement these three methods, which don't really have to do anything necessarily. I am doing this with it though, because I want access to the same Composer instance that is currently running. And then I want to pass that into my command. So that's why I'm doing this in the activate method, is setting it to a static property. But otherwise, you don't really have to do anything else in here to get it working. And then the last thing, the final thing that you have to do to get a Composer plugin working is in your composer.json file, you want to specify that the type is composer-plugin. It's not a library. It's not a project. And you want to, under the extra property in this object, you want to specify a class name. And that class name tells it the plugin that is the Composer plugin to run. And so what happens now is when Composer loads this in, it sees that it's a Composer plugin. It looks for the class that you've specified. It instantiates that class, and then it calls like the activate method to activate the class. And then now it knows, because of the other interfaces you implemented, what you provide and the commands you have. That's really the three main things you have to have. You have to have a command, or well, in this case, if you're going to provide a command to Composer, you have to have a command. You have to have the plugin class, and then you have to update composer.json to point to it. There are a lot more abilities you can do. You know, providing commands is not the only thing. So the Composer documentation provides a section on setting up and using plugins that goes through and tells a lot more detail about what a plugin can do. So we'll get back, we'll talk a little bit more about what plugins can do in a minute as well. So this is kind of the idea behind a plugin. So I want to go back and let's see. There's another couple things I want to talk about with regard to workflow. If I can find share screen again. Oh, I don't need to go back to that. Sorry. Forgot what I'm going to. All right, we're going back to the console. So I want to talk also about, well, I've got a larger plugin that I've built that kind of does a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and install it, though we're not going to talk through it. It's called Ramsey Dev Tools. And so this is something I was creating as a plugin to provide all of this workflow stuff to my open source projects. And we also do something similar at work at Skillshare. We have a similar kind of a library that we use that provides tooling across all of our projects. I don't want to go through all that this particular plugin does. If you want to take a look at it, you can go, it's Ramsey/Dev Tools even at GitHub. But it also, that repository itself does not have a lot of code in it. It has no code in it because I wanted to provide the ability for others who want to use it to extend it. And the thing about Composer plugins is you cannot build on them. You can't extend from them. So instead, I created a DevTools lib, and my DevTools repository requires that DevTools lib. So that's an idea for something that you could probably do if there are little pieces you want to set up and share, but not all in one plugin package. So I've installed this plugin package. Another thing that's kind of interesting here is if we do Composer list. So I mentioned that like SciShell has the REPL command. When we added test to our composer.json, then we have a test command, which I didn't show you this here. It puts those in the output for Composer list, right? And then our test command is here. Now, this is already using the common test command I added to my DevTools library though. So let me open up composer.json and remove this script because we don't need it anymore because I added it to this DevTools. So when I run Composer test now, it'll run the same things, but now it's being done from the common tools library plugin that I added. Another cool thing here, though, is if we look at the Composer list again, you'll see all these commands. These are all these commands that my DevTools package added. And another thing that I've added here for my package, and you can see that they have these namespaces. So if, and this is all part of like the Symfony console paradigm. So if I say Composer list with the name of a namespace, it just gives me those commands. Now, what's neat about what I did with the DevTools library is I've started using the extra. Do I have extra in here already? No. I started using this extra section. And this is by no means like the way you have to do something, but I've started using like my package name as a namespace under here. So I'm doing this for the other packages too. So my package name is Ramsey Dev Tools. And then in here, I've given the ability to set a prefix. So if you kind of dig through the code in there, you might find this, but you can specify properties that you can then access from your plugin. And so therefore further configure your plugin here. And so now if I say, Composer list, all of those commands are now under this dev prefix, which makes it really easy to see everything that package provides to your project. And also, if we just run it, Composer dev test, ooh, it's not defined. That's interesting. Well, if we run Composer dev test all, it runs them. And let's see, another thing, I don't want to get too sidetracked talking about my own library, but if we look at the, because that's not what this talk is necessarily about, but if we look at some other things we can do with configuration here, for example, with what I've got going on there is I've provided the ability to override some of the commands, and that is, I've already forgotten how that looks like. So if I go to my documentation, though, it tells you that the way to, okay, now I've remembered. So if I wanted to add additional things for like, so let's say that the test command doesn't do everything that I want it to do for this project. So I want it to do some other things. Well, I've expanded this, or I've provided the ability to add more configuration so that you're able to add additional things to run. So the thing we can do here is call it test. Whoops. And under that, there's a property called script, similar to what you would see down at the bottom. This is also a string or an array, and we'll just do like a bash command, hello world. And this will run after all of our other scripts have run that are in test. So if I say composer test, it's going to do all of the tests. And then, well, actually, where did it do it? It didn't do it. Oh, I know why. It can't do composer test. It has to do test all because of the way things are named in there. I need to update my documentation for that. All right, so now it says hello world at the bottom because we added that to the list of things. So that's an idea. It's not provided by default out of the box for Composer, but this Dev Tools lib does provide it so that you can, so you could actually just steal it from there. But the idea here is like, well, you could create a plugin that works almost 100%, like maybe 80% that does 80% of everything all your projects need, but maybe each project has some other additional things that you would want to add into that command, either the test command or other commands you've added. You would be able to then update those commands by adding things to them. Or you can just completely disable the command through configuration as well and run only your things for that command. So we talked about these things that we want to run when Composer test runs. And this provides a workflow for us that we're able to share with our team. And now we're also able to share it across all the projects that our team uses. But what if we don't want our developers to have to remember when to run these things? We just want them to run automatically for them. Well, we can do that in CI, right? When they push it up, it'll run for them. But what if we want it to catch it before they do that? Well, we can use hooks, Git hooks. And so there is a package out there that I love to use called CaptainHook. It's in PHP and it's similar. There are several JavaScript libraries like this. One that I've used is Lint Staged. And I think Husky is the name of another one that helps you kind of manage hooks or scripts. I'm going to use this one that's in the PHP world, created by Sebastian Feldman, called CaptainHook. And it has a plugin composer for you. And it will install. And now, because we have this, because it's a plugin, whenever any of your team members clone the repository or check out, like, fetch down, not fetch, but check out and merge in like the changes where you've added this, it will install the hooks locally for them without them having to install them on their own. So something that's interesting about this is like with some of the other tools I've mentioned, we've had to tell our developers, or we have some custom hooks that we created with just bash scripts. We have to tell our developers as part of the cloning process, after you've cloned the repository, then go, copy the hooks over or run this script to set up the hooks. Well, with CaptainHook, if you're adding it as a Composer plugin, it will run the moment they clone the repository, set up the hooks for them. And I'd already created this file ahead of time so that everything would run properly without errors. But you also will add in a CaptainHook.json file to your repository. And this will specify each Git commit hook name. And in this one, I've only got 2, but there are other hooks that it supports. And in this case, I have a hook set up on commit message and on pre-commit. So pre-commit and commit message will kind of fire off around the same time. They are staggered. Pre-commit runs first, and then it takes you into the commit message stage, which then runs. And we've specified an action here, which is a class. It's a fully qualified class name to a class that CaptainHook provides that is an action. And it has some options to it. So if you're familiar with like the Chris Beams GitHub message formatting kind of model, this is what this follows that. And the 2 options we have specified says our subject length can be no longer than 50 characters. Our body line length has to wrap at 72 characters. And so that's the basic stuff going on here. And our pre-commit hook right now, I've just got it saying hello, right? That's the only action we have. And both of them have enabled set to true. So I've got a bunch of stuff right now. Well, only some stuff in our, let's see what's in composer.json. So I've required a bunch of stuff. We've made these changes to our composer.json, and I want to commit them. So I'm going to add them. Yes, and I'll run commit. All right, something that just happened that was so fast that we didn't see it happen was you saw it, I saw it briefly, echo hello. But I will change it in a minute so you can see it all run a little slower. But here, I want to kind of show you what happens when like they get, when the commit message hook fails. So we'll do hello there. And the beams stuff is not going to like that. And it tells us, so up above, we see in our pre-commit hook, we echoed hello world, or just hello. And then prepare commit messages, the hook is disabled. I'm not quite sure why it's printing that out in the output right now. But then our commit message hook runs, and it's the beams, and it says it failed. Now it prints out the entire block here. All of this is the comment that was in that field. I might submit a pull request to CaptainHook to get rid of this comment part because it's not important. But what is important is that this is the commit message I typed, but the subject line has to start with an uppercase letter. So let's go back and say hello world. Whoops. All right, it passed. Now it's done. If we look at our log, we see our commit message. Now I want to update my, my CaptainHook to add in this workflow. We've created a workflow, and we can use composer test here to just do it all at once, or we can specify each of our actions individually if we want to keep them separate. Like vendor, I don't need the options or conditions for this. And then I can go down here and create another action, for example. So I can keep doing that all day, but we'll just use composer test because we already have it set up. And I'm going to make a change to the example.php file. We're going to make our coding standards hate me. Oops, I need to add that. I always do git add -p. It's just a habit of mine because I want to see the diff in each hunk that I'm adding, and I want to approve it. I often will leave out hunks instead of committing everything at one time, and then I'll make really granular commits. So that's why you see me doing what I'm doing. And we'll commit that. All right, our test is actually, our pre-commit is actually going to fail right now. All right, it doesn't look like it failed, but that's because it doesn't look like it failed right now. But we should have gone to our commit message editor window. If you had done -m with the commit message, you probably would not have known that you didn't commit. by accident. So something needs to be fixed here about that maybe. But if we scroll back up, it failed, and then it dumped out all the output so that we can see what failed. And in this case, found one error affecting one line. The opening brace is on the wrong line. So I can go change that back. Let's do something that we'll actually need to commit. Well, actually, we're going to do, this will break a test, but let's fix the test so you can just see this passing. All right. So we got to our commit message window and finished. Well, let's not do that. Hello there actually doesn't follow the Beam coding standard or the Beam commit message standard either. It's supposed to start with an imperative, and it shouldn't start with the word updated either, those kinds of things. So it would be like fixed coding standard issue. I don't know. We'll just say that for now. Oh, it's not supposed to use the word fixed either, apparently. Someone give me a good imperative word.
Fix.
Oh, that's right. It can't be like past tense. It has to be like present tense.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you. All right. So we see done, done. And what we've shown here, though, is we've taken that whole like workflow that we want to use, and we want all of our team members to use, and we've baked it into a portable solution that can now be transferred from repository to repository across all of our projects, that all of our teams, or maybe our single team or whoever is working on, and they all have a shared experience now that happens at the moment, like in this case, at the moment they commit. We can also use other Git hooks. So like Git, we can use the merge. Let's see, there's like a post-merge hook and a pre-merge hook. I think there's a pre-push hook that CaptainHook supports. There's all sorts of hooks that it supports that we can build tooling or we can add our tooling to, so that it can block those things from happening at those stages. Now, a question came up before when I was giving this talk about, how your team members might feel about these kinds of things being imposed on them, or or like if I go in right now and just set it to one coding standard and one coding standard to rule them all, is that gonna cause problems with the team? And really, on my team at Skillshare, like this has never been an issue. Like if we want to add something, we'll have like a quick discussion about it. And the most important thing for everyone on our team, I have strong opinions about some things, but the strongest opinion I have is it needs to be consistent. And as long as all of us are following the same coding standards, the same rules for like how our commit messages should be formatted, I don't really care what it looks like as long as it all looks the same. So I think that your team has to kind of come to that point. Everyone on your team just has to buy into, hey, we're all going to do the same thing. I might not agree with, whether it's tabs or spaces, whatever, but we've got a single standard that we're sticking to. And you know what? Like you can build things into this that will actually automatically format your code for you. And that's one thing that PHP CBF is a tool that's part of PHP Code Sniffer that will fix your coding standards based on the coding standards rules you have. If you use PHP CS Fixer, you can do the same thing. So there are ways to build that into your workflow if you want your workflow itself to fix the things and then commit them as well as part of a hook. So you can add those changes to your stage, to the staged files, and then have them commit at the end of the, or at the end of let me just show what I'm talking about. This will be easier. So let's say that, what am I looking at? I'm in the wrong thing. So let's say that I want to fix coding standards issues first and then run my tests. Yes, PHP CBF. And now I have made changes to some files, but I need to, I'm going to have to look at CaptainHook's documentation for this, but I need to also add the stage changes. And the way I can do that is come on, Ben, where was it? I had this like off to my side and then threw it away. And then just decided right now that this would be great to do. This is what happens in live coding, right? All right, here we go. Oh no, not staged files. I may not be able to do it. I thought I could. Oh no, I know what it was. It was, I did something that, so this is, I'm not advising you to do this, but there is probably a better way to do this. So I mentioned just a minute ago, I like to do get add-p. So what this will do is obviously add all changes that are in your index to the stage. And then after this, it goes through with the commit process. So this is a thing that we actually do where I work. We will run the code sniffer fixer, or whatever CBF stands for, but it's made by the PHP Code Sniffer project. Does anyone know what the BF stands for? I don't remember. All right.
I think it's beautifier.
Oh, yes. Yes. But what's the F stand for? Fixer, maybe. We just made that up.
I always thought it was just some part of beautifier. It was like the Buta and the fire.
Oh, could be. Could be.
Maybe.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense, though. All right. We'll go with David on that. All right. So we've fixed things, ran tests, everything passed, and now we're going to add our changes. Now, this is a very interesting thing here. I also want to do something else here. I had to commit this, or I had to, I'm proud of this, so that's why I'm showing it. I had to actually do this as a pull request to the project. All right. And I want to do another change to example. And whoops, the other change is I'm going to say just nice, whatever. All right. So I want to add this. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to split this into two and say yes to this change and no to this change. So I have staged, if we look at what I've staged the changes to the CaptainHook file, and then only this one change to example.php. Now this one change will get fixed, but the other change that I made in that file, if you're paying careful attention to what I was doing in the CaptainHook.json, it should add this accidentally. But I have committed a thing to CaptainHook that will fix that. And that thing that I committed is, and I'm running out of time here, so I apologize, but we'll wrap up here in just a minute, is a common thing with this kind of workflow, right? The workflow here is I want to make changes when I make a commit that fixes the coding standard stuff, so no one argues about coding standards ever again, basically. And they don't even have to worry about following them as long as I've got a robust standard that'll fix it all. So there is a plugin for CaptainHook that I created called a preserve working tree plugin, or it's just called preserve working tree. And the way to implement that, or the way to add that, it's not in there by default because we weren't sure at this time, like who would want to use this and who doesn't. But it's something that I end up using a lot because of the way I write and commit code. And I commit them in little hunks. I don't commit them all at one time. So this, I got to find the, here it is. All right. So in your CaptainHook.json at the top, you can add a config section. And there's a bunch of config options. I'm not going to get into them all right now, but we want to add a plugins array, an array of plugins. And this array of, whoops, each plugin is just an object with the name of the plugin. And I need to go back and do double things, but I'm just copying and pasting here. Actually, you don't really have to in JSON, but it just looks nicer, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so I have the fully qualified class name to preserve working tree, which is a plugin. And you can also give options to this as well if the plugin accepts options. This plugin does not, but there are other capabilities in the plugin system for CaptainHook. And now let's add that as well, but we're still not going to add this one. So what will happen now is it will move the changes out of the index that aren't staged, and then it will run our hooks, and then at the very end, it will re-add those things that were not staged to the working tree. So I'm going to commit. Whoops, which file is invalid JSON? That's funny. Oh, it's the CaptainHook one. I probably forgot a comma or something somewhere. Oh, you know what? Maybe it does need the slashes.
Do you need the leading ones?
Maybe. That wouldn't cause the JSON.
Wouldn't cause the problem, no.
Yeah, that wouldn't cause the syntax error, but still. What the? All right. Let's see. Oh, okay. I have to stage it. It already moved them out of the way. It moved my changes out of the way and then tried to, all right. Okay. But it failed. It failed to, here, let's see what we got. All right, so our working tree though still has the oh, it actually added that to it. Anyway, I am now debugging and I'm kind of out of time, so I don't want to go through this too much, but the idea here in your CaptainHook.json though is you should be able to do things that add a standard workflow for your whole team, and maybe even fix up some of the code that they have, like according to your coding standards, so that they don't even have to think about it. And so that other developers, maybe even if it's an open source project, other developers who are working on it would not need to really give a lot of thought to following your rules, because your project enforces those rules in a way that is very, very seamless and allows them to just do the work that they need to do and not have to like struggle to figure out how to fix those problems. So I apologize that I couldn't get that part working. I'll try to build that in to a later version of this talk, or at least get the steps correct. I'm not obviously thinking in my full brain right now, while I'm talking and trying to code at the same time. So it's probably something very simple that I'm missing. But let's go back to my slide deck. And I wanted to run through a list of other tools. So I asked on Twitter a little while back, what are some of the favorite tools that you have that you run as part of your workflow? And obviously I couldn't get into like even a fraction of these. I only had a few that I really wanted to touch on. But any of these are tools that if your team's using them, or if you think that they might be useful for your team, you could add these as to a workflow that you can build into a Composer scripts property, or you could build into a Composer plugin to share. There's a lot of them, and even more than I have right here. One of them, I'll point out a couple of these that I think are interesting. Lando is interesting for teams that want to share the same kind of local development environment configurations, so that everyone, when they spin up a local dev environment, they're all the same. So that's what Lando is for. PHP CS Extra and PHP compatibility are good tools for. The first one is additional sniffs for PHP code sniffer. The second one is figuring out whether you have code in your project that is not compatible with other versions of PHP, but according to your composer.json, needs to be compatible with those earlier versions. Let's see, Composer Normalize is a tool that I use a lot. And it basically just like, I was talking earlier about like solving the problem of arguing about where things should, like how your coding standards should look just by implementing coding standards and just letting it, do it on its own. Well, this kind of does the same thing for your composer.json. It like alleviates any of the headache of trying to figure out where does the extra property go? Does it go at the end or like in the middle or whatever? It just does it for you. You don't have to think about it. Let's see. I'm going to skip ahead because there's a lot in this, even this. So you've probably used PHP-L to do like to lint. It checks for syntax errors in your PHP code files before they are run. And so it can warn you really early if there's any syntax errors. Well, you can also use PHP parallel lint if you have a large code base, and running it will parallelize the code base to find syntax errors very quickly. PHP CS Fixer, I've mentioned that a little bit. Some of you may actually like it and prefer it over PHP Code Sniffer. That's great. It has a lot of good rules on its own. You can set it up. I will talk a bit more about it and PHP Code Sniffer in a minute when I mention another tool for coding standards. Let's see, I want to skip over lots of good stuff here though. The last slide here, let's see. Some people even use Prettier to do their PHP coding standards. And also you can use Prettier for every other file that you've got in there. So if you've got HTML or Markdown or YAML files or whatever, and you want them all to follow a similar, like a standard, Prettier is a JavaScript tool that allows you to apply a standard to all of those files. Rove Security Advisories is a really great package. It's not part of your workflow. Well, it is kind of part of your workflow. You just install it, or you require it as a dev dependency, and then just forget about it. It will block you from installing a version of any package that has a security advisory associated with it. So if a single version of like, this happens with some Symfony packages and stuff, they're not the only ones. I don't mean to call them out as the only ones with security advisories, but it's the one that came to mind. They'll have like individual versions in between blocks of versions that have a security advisory, and Rove Security Advisories is able to block just that one version, so you can't install it. So it's really helpful in that way. The other tool for coding standards I wanted to point out is Simplify Easy Coding Standard. If you like PHP CS Fixer, but there are some sniffs in PHP Code Sniffer that you think would be useful and helpful, or vice versa. Simplify's easy coding standard lets you take both of those and write a configuration file in pure PHP to combine them. And now when you run it, it will actually apply rules from PHP CS Fixer and PHP Code Sniffer together. So that's really super useful, I think. That is all I have today. Remember, the big thing here, the big takeaway is like you're building a workflow that makes it easier for you and for other developers to work on the same projects together. And I hope that what you saw kind of gets your mind, churning and turning over to think about ways you can improve your own workflow and your own developer experience where you work, or if you work by yourself, it can even improve that experience as well. And I'm open for any questions.
Can you give me a little bit of insight on how, I'll give you a slight bit of background on there. We had some hooks installed automatically through Husky a while ago back in the day, and gave me the heebie-jeebies essentially of like, you've got access to my Git hooks, which is affecting literally anything. I can accidentally run a thing, right? And GitHook will do a thing. Does CaptainHook do something different where it's only for the project you're running and it isn't affecting Git globally?
Well, it shouldn't affect Git globally. If a hook installs, it's only for that repo. It does not install for GitHub, and it does not install for, in fact, I can just show you where they go. Real quick. And I think Husky even does this. So I'm not quite sure what you're encountering with Husky.
This was a number of years ago that really put me off to any of those tools that install automatically.
And
so it might be that they changed how it works.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
However they were doing it back then might have been different than what they're doing now.
It's like deleting the project that installed the Husky stuff would then make Husky error on every Git command. And
oh, that's weird. Okay, yeah, that may have gone into like some global.
Yeah. Okay, so there's ways to do it at a repo level then.
So I'm in the repo right here, and if you look in Git hooks, this is where those hooks go, right, in your Git database. And if we look at, let's look at the pre-commit one. Captain hooks all look the same. They're just very simple. They're just one line in this bash script that calls Captain Hook from your vendor bin directory. I'm giving a talk, buddy. Calls Captain Hook from your vendor bin directory, and just runs it like this, right? And it runs the command hook : pre-commit. So if we look at Captain Hook, we can, whoops. If we look at Captain Hook, we can actually just see all those commands, right? So each of the commit hooks have that installed. If I want to get rid of them, I can just delete. I've just deleted the hooks file before, or another way is just like to clone the library again, or to clone the repo again. But these are all repo local only. They do not install to a global location, as far as I know. You can.
And there obviously needs PHP on whatever machine you're actually committing on.
Right. It would. That's a good point too. If you're, in fact, someone mentioned that in a previous talk. If you use Docker to run PHP and you don't have PHP installed locally, then you'd have to run those commands through. Oh, let's see. Yeah, if you made the commits locally and not through the Docker container, it would have problems.
Good. Thanks.
There might be some ways around that I'm not aware of, because I'm sure that other people do that all the time, I'm sure. Captain Hook is kind of a small project right now. I mean, with a small community around it, I'm hoping to make it a bigger community. I think it's an important tool. I'm not even one of the maintainers, but I think it's an important tool. Mainly so you don't have to like download tons of NPM packages to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a quick question. You were saying that Lando makes it so that everybody has the same environment. That kind of seems like Docker to me. So like,
Yeah, I have not dug into Lando like a whole bunch. It's something I've only just become familiar with, and I was skeptical at first, and I honestly don't see a lot of need for my team using it. But in terms of workflow, I'm trying to get, where is this? In terms of workflow, I'm mentioning it because it might be helpful for other developers on teams that may not have those kinds of tools yet. So this is Lando. I just shared the web browser here. A liberating dev tool for all your projects. So yeah, when I first looked at it, I'm like, what? I don't know what this does. Like just looking at it, I still don't know what it does. But I've had several people tell me that, and yeah, I read through this stuff. Like I still don't understand what it does. I don't understand what this does, right? So I'm kind of ragging on it a little bit because their documentation does not make it clear what it does, except for this part. Commit a Lando file that describes your project's dependencies to your code repository and collaborate like you would any other file. I still, though, don't exactly know how it helps me there. So other people kind of chimed in and explained it a little bit more to me, that it has a bunch of recipes already. Specifically, like I think it's very useful for WordPress teams working on WordPress projects. They don't have WordPress showing right here, but I looked into it a little bit more, and they've got recipes for WordPress and Laravel, and working on different platforms. Like you can see they've got Platform SH as a sponsor and Pantheon as well, because they have recipes within Lando that lets you get up and running on those platforms quickly, and also developing local for those platforms. But yes, you could probably use Docker, and under the hood,
looks like it's Docker based.
It might be using Docker, yeah.
I was looking and looking and looking and finally found, if you want to update, do this, shut down Docker, and then update.
It probably, like a lot of times we'll find ourselves writing a bunch of scripts, right, to get like the Docker compose script just right for us and so forth. This probably abstracts a lot of that away, so you don't have to bother writing all of that.
yeah, it sounds like that. Speaking of platform.sh, they are a sponsor of our user group. So they're the
He told me that. I was doing that on purpose.
Yeah, they're the reason why we can have a Zoom meeting that goes this long. So yeah, just wanted to throw that in there. I did have one other question for you. One thing with the commit hooks, running your tests and that kind of thing in order to be able to commit, I wanted to get your opinion on one of the kind of issues I have with that is if you're in the middle of a project and you just need to commit to make sure that everything is, so you don't lose anything, that kind of thing, but your tests aren't passing right now because you're still in the middle of the project. Like, is that just something you just don't
So
do?
there's some things you can do around that. Certainly if you're, so I would always build this into like your CI pipeline too, those kinds of things. I think that on a big project, you're going to run into problems where when you commit, it's going to run all your tests, and then that's going to take a while. And you probably don't want to do that every time you commit. You might not, like, depending on the size of that body of tests, you might not want to do that when you run, when you do like a push, because you could say, well, we're not going to do this on every commit, but we're going to do it when you push to the repo. Like we'll have a pre-push hook. The other thing you can do though, so obviously when you push it up, your CI is going to kick off and run anyway. So I don't think you really have to have it on a pre-push. I think that the things that are important, at least in terms of that can happen locally before pushing, are things like coding standards checks. When we do a coding standards check, I think we have it set up, and I didn't show that in this presentation, but we've got it set up so it only runs the coding standards checks on the files that had changed. And there are ways to do that, even in CaptainHook configuration. There is a, let's see if I can find it. Oh, yes, there's in the pre-commit hook, there's a placeholder variable called staged files. And so you can, oh, actually it has an example here. Let me just put this up on screen. And I'll drop the link here in chat and then put this up on screen. If I can find my share, here we go. And so they've got this, they've got several different kinds of variables available to different hooks. And in the pre-commit hook, they have staged files. And you can also do this pipe separated stuff. This is not well documented right now. I hope that to change that. And also I hope with more usage, others will help kind of give back to the project and help improve the documentation and stuff. But you could do something like this. This is an action that's just PHPCS. And we're passing to it the list of staged files that are only of type PHP. So it's not going to run coding standards for our entire code base. So if it's a really large code base, that can take a while to run too. But we've probably only touched a few files. We might have touched more than a few. Like sometimes you have a large commit, but for most of the time, this will just run for the staged files, which is a smaller subset of files, and we can get results right away that tell us whether or not, you know, we were adhering to the standards. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, David posted it there in the channel earlier. Yes. I'm open to any questions about anything else too. If you wanted to ask about, if you wanted to ask about UUID or release management.
I just wanted to thank you for the work you put in on that project because we use it all the time. So,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, I really appreciate it.
It's a really
Much
simple
so.
tool, but like everyone is really excited about it. So that makes me happy.
Yep, we dig it.
At my last company, they built their own, and it was a little kludgy, and so I just did a quick Google search on Composer, you know, Composer package, and yours was the top one, you know, and so I was like, I'm just gonna use that on all my projects, and then like, I don't know, it was like a couple months later, my manager was like, we're gonna start using this Ramsey UUID package instead of ours. Because I went rogue on it, and then my manager found it, and he's like, yeah, we're gonna use this instead.
That's funny. Yeah, the reason it's so popular and has so many downloads is because I think Laravel itself requires it. And so it's part of Laravel. So I'm lucky in that respect that it has the most downloads of any UUID package because of that.
What sort of a time commitment do you have being the release master?
That's a very good question. So the time commitment is actually not, it's not a lot. I think it can be more or less depending on what you make of it. So I know that some release managers go through the bugs at bugs.php.net and try to like categorize bugs and find bugs that need to get into 8.1 and try to, really dig in and find out, if they can get solved. And then, and they also go through the pull requests on GitHub and tag them with appropriate, there's some tags that we give to them to let people know if it's waiting on a review or waiting on the author or insert, whatever. So they'll go through and tag them and also put them into the 8.1 milestone. So that is one approach to release management, and that takes a lot more of the time. The actual release building process is really not that time consuming. And then there's the other side kind of a picture where sometimes some of the release managers just focus on the releasing part, and they let the rest of the core developers focus on managing the bugs and the PRs. So I found this out because Joe Watkins, he's Crack Joe everywhere else, KRAKJOE. He was encouraging us, Patrick and I, to go through the bugs and go through the pull requests. So I was doing a lot of that, but then I was finding that like Nikita and Christoph and others already do all of that, a lot of that. And Derek, I was having a conversation with Derek, and Derek's just like, I don't do any of that. I just do the release stuff that he's needing. I mean, he's already doing a lot of that anyway. But as part of his release management duties, it wasn't something that he put in the time for. It's just really kind of like, if you've got the time to do those extra things, I think it's helpful to the rest of the project to do them. And also to help kind of let others know what you're expecting to land in 8.1.
Do you end up doing merges on those pull requests, or are there other people that are making those decisions, or based on reviews and whatnot? And then, sorry, real quick follow-up, because you'll probably get to the answer on this anyway. As you get towards feature freeze, are you the gatekeeper for not allowing things in, or does that also fall on others?
So no, as we get closer to feature freeze, we are the gatekeepers. If something's not going to make it in, so if there's, in particular, this will come into play like with RFCs probably, mostly. If there's a big RFC that's waiting or that needs to be voted on or needs to be developed, we will hound the developers and hound the authors of the RFC until that kind of comes through, or we just say it can't make it 8.1 now. As far as merging though, that's again kind of the same thing I was just talking about with regard to following the pull requests. I can merge things, and I have merged things, but then I found that like I didn't know what I was merging. So well, actually, I think the funny, I don't have it in front of me. I need to pull it up though one of these days to keep along with me for these questions. But I merged something in, and Nikita was like, "Congratulations! Now you're the maintainer of those things." I was like, "Wait, what?" Because I looked at it and it looked good, and I thought it had it was something to do with with sodium, like adding a new kind of encryption algorithm or something. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was adding constants and some new functions. I think it was mainly just the constants for the new algorithm, for this other algorithm. And I merged it in, and he was like, well, now we need to have tests for all of that stuff. So you need to write all the tests or get the author to do that. So probably should have gotten the author to do that beforehand, before merging in.
So yeah, checks you weren't aware that they try to get, I guess.
Yeah, so I think that the thing here though is that like a lot of that merging is already happening, especially by people who are much more intimately aware of what all's in the PRs than I am. So I'm kind of letting them do it, but I'm responding to PRs to try to see, like, especially some of the older ones, to see like what's the status of this? Does this need to go into 8.1?
Gotcha.
But yeah, definitely when it gets closer, we will be the gatekeepers on that. I think that, so I can't remember off the top of my head when beta freezes. Thanks, Sam. I'm sorry, beta is like 2 weeks from, I think it's the first beta is 2 weeks from next Thursday, because the second alpha is next Thursday. And what I'm saying is I can't remember when feature freeze is. I can't remember if it's the first beta or the first RC. But so we will be having feature freeze coming up soon though.
Cool. You've done C code in the core or something, haven't you, as well?
A little bit. I am
A while back. I'm trying to remember what it was, but I can't remember.
array
Was it
column.
an array function?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I'm not like, I don't call myself a C programmer. I think the biggest issue I have with that, I think historically the problem I have with C was I didn't really have a good understanding of all the macros. And so macros like make everything different in C. And I didn't have an editor that was showing me what those macros were. So when I would comb through the PHP source code, I couldn't find anything. But now I'm using CLion right now, and I can just click on a macro and it shows me or takes me to where it's defined.